Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about fat versus carbs as your fuel sources for training, for recovery, everything else. And here's what people need to remember. The data on this has been pretty good at this point. When we look at various athletes and we look at people who do very high carb versus very high fat diets, ultimately what we're finding, even for athletic performance, body composition, things like that, it doesn't matter. In other words, carbs versus fat are dependent upon the individual, their energy, their mood, their digestion, their inflammation, but they don't directly affect body composition. And I've even said in the past, and I need to correct this, that it was very possibly true that a person who is bulking, who ate very, very low fat and higher carb, might gain less body fat. Right? They might gain less body fat. The fact of the matter is, though, that was always a hypothetical. It just doesn't seem to be the case. The only macro that really particularly matters in terms of performance and body composition is your protein. So I would say to people who don't have individual needs that are dependent upon these things, you can be very, very flexible regarding your non-protein calories. Which also means that people who excessively count macros aren't even doing themselves any favor. In other words, calories matter, protein matters, but how you fill the last 1,000 calories sometimes of your intake every day, as far as carb versus fat, doesn't matter. It just really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Now, am I saying keto diets don't matter? Am I saying fat intake doesn't matter? No, but these are secondary concerns. We have individual food tolerances. We have, are you getting micronutrient sufficiency? Right, those are things that we need to be concerned with. And I'm not telling people to fill their diet with junk food. So when I make this statement, I'm talking about quality carb sources versus quality fat sources. I am not talking about people doing the if it fits your macros. I'm not talking about flexible dieting. I'm not talking about people getting their fat from butter or getting their carbs from table sugar, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the carb versus fat debate in the context of a nutritionally balanced diet that meets micronutrient sufficiency is largely irrelevant for body composition and performance. Now, there's some caveats there. What do I mean? Well, obviously you need enough carbs to fuel your training. Now, I did keto a good chunk of this year and I gained strength on it. But at a certain threshold, my energy intake has gone up to where my maintenance calories has exceeded 4,000 calories a day. I chose to add a gallon of milk to my diet and eat mostly keto-type foods outside of that. What does that mean for me? It means a lot of meat, a lot of vegetables, right? I eat very, very large amounts of green vegetables, by the way. But I need something in the range of 200 grams of carbs. My training volume dictates that I need those carbs. Now, for me, that's still a very low carb diet. If we were to go off percentages, 200 grams of carbs is not that big. I eat over 4,000 calories a day. That's what I actually need to maintain my body weight due to all my training. But at a certain point, yes, you have to have enough carbohydrates to fuel your training. Yes, I am aware that through gluconeogenesis we can convert protein into carbs and to a certain degree fat into carbs. So we do have some flexibility there. But when you're doing what I'm doing where you're hitting maxes every day and then doing 20 plus sets of supplemental lifts for higher reps and then some conditioning work, and you weigh over 200 pounds, you burn through an enormous amount of glucose. Getting that from protein would be almost absurd. I mean, I would have to eat something in the range of 600 grams of protein a day. It's just easier to drink milk and get some carbs, or throw in some potatoes if I need. If I even needed more carbs beyond that, I would probably eat some potatoes. I think potatoes are one of the best carbohydrate sources for an athlete. Bar none. Yes, I think it's superior to rice, but it's besides the point. It has to do with the total nutrient profile, not the fact that we're dealing with carbs versus fat. you have to have enough carbohydrates to fuel your training. Now, a lot of people say, well, you've also got the insulin in and insulin in recovery. Yeah, but people who eat very high amounts of carbohydrates become more insulin resistant. Therefore, you don't get the benefits that you want to the same degree. And your very high protein intake also has a large insulinogenic effect. So people who train very, very hard and have a high degree of insulin sensitivity, you don't have to eat 500 grams of carbs to get the insulin you need to shuttle nutrients into muscles to help with recovery. It's just not necessary. Okay? Yes, it's critical. But all that basically tells us is that people who train really, really hard probably shouldn't get 80% of their calories from fat. That's all that tells us when we talk about insulin and recovery. Because again, protein can do that. And someone who has a very, very good insulin sensitivity, a couple hundred grams of carbohydrates goes an enormously long way. So we have to have enough carbs, though, to fuel our training. You're not going to do that on fat and protein. It becomes very, very inefficient and difficult to do at a certain threshold. Like when you train at my training loads. So I have to have some carbs. But that's individual needs. Let's come over to the point with fat. People say, well, what happens if I run a really, really low-fat diet? Well, that can cause, number one, satiety issues. Okay, number two, let's come back over to the point for athletes. Just like I've said, you're going to have enough carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen and have training fuel. You're going to have to do that. Even if you don't want carbs, even if you want to do a keto diet, when your training loads reach a certain threshold, it's going to become difficult to get it from fat and protein. Let's come over to the other point. If your dietary fat goes too low, we have studies looking at this, particularly in endurance athletes, but if you train very, very high volume for any sport, these same rules could apply. It's been noted in endurance athletes that the percentage of their calories that they get from fat is inversely proportionate to the number of injuries they get. Okay, I want to make that clear. Some people, excessive carbohydrate intake causes more inflammation. I know that sounds counterintuitive when the topic comes up of saturated fat in the blood causing inflammation. Well, the point we come to, if you look at people who run keto diets, they have the lowest inflammatory markers related to that because they have the lowest amount of saturated fat in their blood. Okay, at the most extreme end, that would be the highest saturated fat diets anybody does. They actually have less blood saturated fat, and it's anti-inflammatory, and it's one reason it's being used to treat specific medical conditions. Okay, and that's been noted even by sports nutritionists who actually are concerned that it may reduce inflammation so much that there is a debate as to whether that could inhibit muscle growth. But let's come over to the point with excessive carbohydrate. Sometimes it's more inflammation. And when you're having very, very large amounts of training volume, such as, again, a marathon runner has extreme amounts of training volume. Excessive inflammation causes injuries. All right, we can run into problems with tearing connective tissue and stuff. You've got to control inflammation. And one of the things that they've noted, and it's probably largely related to inflammation, and tendon health and everything else from, again, needing enough fat-soluble vitamins, enough fat in your diet, things like that, that when fat intake goes lower, injury rates go up. So here's the point. They're largely interchangeable. They do not affect body composition meaningfully. Where you get your non-protein calories from, carbs versus fat, doesn't, until you go to the extreme ends, doesn't impact performance or body composition that significantly. It just really doesn't. Personal preference. Personal preference. Protein and calories, that's what's going to matter. Again, in the context of a balanced whole food diet that has micronutrient sufficiency. You're not deficient in anything. I'm not talking about a junk food diet. I don't advocate people eat junk food. But it's largely interchangeable, so the people who obsess over exact micro counts, it's nonsense. Look, you need enough carbohydrate to fuel your training. You need enough dietary fat to keep inflammation down, to also help with recovery, have satiety, nice slower absorption, steady release of energy, right? You need enough dietary fat to basically keep your injuries low. And you need enough carbohydrates for your training. Outside of meeting those two needs, the rest is nothing but personal preference. It doesn't have a meaningful impact on your performance or your body composition outside of maybe just how you feel and what your appetite is like. That's it. So this debate of carbs versus fat is moronic. Okay, it's moronic. A lot of that comes down to personal preference. They're relatively interchangeable as a fuel source for athletic people. Let's come to the other point. People want to talk about body composition. If you're not athletic and you're not training hard, don't pretend like you care about your body composition, because you obviously don't. So therefore, this conversation is only relevant to athletic populations. Because if a person is fat and want to get into shape, they better become athletic. That needs to be your highest priority. That is a number one priority, and your diet needs to facilitate fueling your training and fueling your recovery. Okay, that's the whole point. That's it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.